Inflamed? Are you into prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics, pharmabiotics, psychobiotics, symbiotics, or antibiotics? Why on earth does it matter? And I will go into defining all of those terms as we go. These biotics matter because your body is home to 100 trillion microorganisms with a combined total weight of over 2 kilograms. Now that is heavier than the weight of your brain, which is about 1.4 kilograms. And our microbes have evolved to play central roles in maintaining just about every aspect of our health. They help us digest food, and I will also elaborate on these. This is just a quick overview. They help us digest our food. They control how many calories we absorb. They produce vitamins. They affect our mood. They educate our immune system. They influence our risk of allergies, asthma, autoimmune diseases, diabetes, depression, dementia, heart disease. The list goes on. They even tinker with our genes. They impact our response to medications. Have you ever wondered why some people get side effects, some people don't? For some people, an antidepressant is really effective, and for some people it's not. We're now discovering that our gut bacteria may just play a major role. And in fact, the more we learn about our gut bacteria, or our bacterial residents in general, the more we discover they meddle with absolutely everything. And gut bacteria are so influential, they actually predict our likelihood of developing obesity better than our own genes. The gut is even described as a second brain because it has 100 million nerve cells lining its walls from esophagus to rectum. That's about the same number of neurons as in the brain of a cat. Imagine that. You have a cat brain in your gut. And these neurons enable your gut bacteria to communicate with your brain via a long, large nerve called the vagus. Do you want to know what they're saying? Well, that's what tonight's webinar is all about. A whirlwind tour of our internal ecosystem and an insight into how fecal transplants can save lives. Holy crapsule. So let's start at the very beginning. In the summer of 1822, on the island of Mackinac in Michigan, a French-Canadian fur trader by the name of Alexis St. Martin was accidentally shot with a musket, a long gun, from less than a metre away. Now, the doctor that ran to the site of the accident was Army surgeon Dr. William Beaumont, and he found Alexis gasping for life with a huge hole in his abdomen, sort of larger than my fist. It was in his left upper abdomen. And when he peered inside the hole, he could see that Alexis' stomach also had a hole in it, albeit a much smaller hole, the size of my index finger. Nobody thought that poor Alexis would survive, but Dr. William Beaumont was an excellent surgeon. And through his superior surgical skills, he was able to save Alexis' life. However, he wasn't able to close up the stomach wound. So what actually happened was Alexis was left what is known as a fistula. It's a gastric fistula. And what this is, it's just a permanent hole in his stomach that actually opens to the outside world, outside his body. Now, as a result of the accident, Alexis was no longer able to do the work of, the physical work of a fur trader. So Dr. Beaumont, from the kindness of his heart, hired Alexis to be his live-in handyman. In truth, however, he hired him to be his guinea pig. I don't know all the details of their domestic arrangements, but when Dr. Beaumont relocated to New York, he took Alexis with him and started to do some really weird experiments on Alexis' digestive tract. For instance, he got a silk string and he tied it to pieces of boiled beef, bits of chicken, raw cabbage, stale bread. And he actually dangled these bits of food through that fistula into his stomach, held them there for a little while, pulled the bits out, and then, sent these bits of food off to the lab to get analysed. Okay, they were smaller than this, but you get the idea. I mean, it was 1822, no social media, so they had to find other ways to entertain themselves. But the reason the doctor was doing these experiments was so he could answer a question that they didn't know the answer to in 1822, and that is, how do we digest our food? Was it the mechanical action of the stomach, or was it these chemicals that the stomach produced? And after he sent them to the lab and the bits of food came back, Dr. Beaumont did discover that we produce enzymes in a very acidic stomach, and these enzymes are different for the different types of food, and that's how we digest food. So he was a hero for answering that question. However, Dr. Beaumont also accidentally discovered something else. See, Alexis didn't always enjoy these little experiments, and sometimes he got irritable and upset, not surprisingly. So to Dr. Beaumont's surprise, when Alexis became really angry, his digestion slowed down. When he became anxious or fearful, his gut became more active. And when Alexis was in a calm state, his food was digested more efficiently. So anger slowed things down, potentially constipation. Anxiety sped things up. Have you ever been a bit afraid about something and ended up with diarrhea? And an optimal emotional state was associated with optimal digestion. And this was the first documented observation that emotional states can increase or decrease activity in the gut. And several decades and 238 experiments later, Dr. Beaumont died in 1853, having opened the door literally to the gut-brain connection. Alexis, on the other hand, just for completeness sake, outlived him by 27 years and ended up going back to work as a fur trader and voyager. And he passed away at the ripe old age of 83. Now, let's forward a century. It's now 1946. And this history is important because I really want you to understand how the gut and the brain are connected and how we made these discoveries. So now it's not long after the end of World War II. We've got an army physician looking after a soldier with extensive parts of his small and large intestine exposed from his injuries. And what this doctor noticed was when his patient became more distressed by the arrival of other soldiers, when he was really distressed or anxious, once again, his gut activity sped up. But when he was calm again, or when he could reassure this soldier, his gut activity slowed down. Once again, it was the same observation as Dr. Beaumont. And then in the 1960s, a gastroenterologist by the name of Dr. Thomas Almy did experiments in which he monitored colon activity in subjects while he deliberately interviewed them about emotionally charged topics. And once again, the same pattern was observed. Hostility and aggression make the colon contract more quickly, whereas hopelessness or self-reproach or feelings of inadequacy or just anger slow it all down. And this is when interest in the gut-brain connection really took off. Okay, so when we talk about gut health, what we're actually talking about is a system with three inseparable components. The gut cells themselves, which make up the gastrointestinal tract from our mouth to our anus. So it's the gut itself, plus the nerves and nerve cells, also called neurons, that are interwoven with our gut cells, and they are actually known as the enteric nervous system. And they communicate with our brain through the vagus nerve, which I mentioned earlier. And then we've got the microbes, or the trillions of microorganisms that live in every nook and cranny of the gut. And together, these three entities, our gut, its nerve cells, and the microbial residents in our gut, form an amazing information exchange system called the gut-brain microbiome axis. Now, this might seem self-evident to you today, but 3 decades ago, 30 years ago, when I was in medical school, we knew none of this. All we thought that the gut was, it was just this tube that broke down and absorbed food and eliminated what we didn't need. We knew there were bacteria in there, but we really didn't appreciate their significance at all. Now we know that microorganisms make up over 90% of the cells in our body and over 99% of all the genes in our body. And even though our cells are much bigger than the cells of our resident bacteria, our own cells are vastly outnumbered. So you are not alone. Now, most of our 100 trillion microorganisms are bacteria, but they're not the only things in there. We also have viruses, we have fungi, and we have a kind of in-between species called archaea. But they're mostly bacteria, so most of the time I will just be talking about, call them bacteria, but know that they're not the only ones in there. I'll just give a few more numbers to boggle your mind. It's estimated that there are more bacteria in our gut than there are stars in the Milky Way. 1 gram of feces contains more bacteria than there are people on Earth. And different countries actually infuse their citizens with different bacteria. So if you live in America versus Japan, those two countries tend to have different patterns of microorganisms, different again to people who live in Australia or England. And this is influenced not just by different diets, but different environments, air pollution, plants, everything seems to play a role. And in fact, no two people have the same microorganisms living on their bodies, not in the same country, not in the same household, not even identical twins. Everyone has a unique microbial identity, just as we have a unique fingerprint. And in fact, crime scene investigators are now starting to not only use fingerprints to identify criminals, but bacterial prints, because your bacterial inhabitants are uniquely yours and they will give you away. As an aside, you can even tell if you've got a dog and you want to identify their owner, you can test all the bacteria in various people, and the one who owns the dog, his bacteria are going to resemble that of the dog's. It's quite fascinating. So we don't just have microorganisms in our gut, we have bugs on every exposed surface of our body, our skin, our nose, ears, mouth, teeth, lungs, and vagina. It's all potential real estate for microorganisms. And as with everything to do with real estate, it's all about location, location, location. Microorganisms are very fussy about the environments they need for their survival. Some of them prefer the intense acidity of our stomach, others the salty moisture of our armpits. Body odour is produced by bacteria. Sometimes it's not very pleasant, sometimes it's not so bad. The most densely populated region of the body is the colon or large intestine. But, even our mouth has 500 different known species, and they are so fussy that the microbes that live on the front teeth won't live on the back teeth, and even the bacteria that live on the front of a tooth will not be the same as the bacteria that live on the back of that same tooth. There must also be something different about our right and left hands, because only 17% of the microbes that live on your left hand also live on your right hand. Go figure. All right. Now let me just clarify a few definitions, some words that you're going to hear a lot, probably already have. Microbiome, microbiota, and metabolites. Microbiome refers to all the genes of all the microorganisms that live in an environmental niche. So your gut microbiome are all the genes of the bacteria and viruses and fungi that live in your gut. Your skin microbiome are the genes of all the microorganisms that live on your skin, and so on. Whereas microbiota refers to the organisms themselves, and they're also called microbes, or in the case of the gut, your gut flora. They're all interchangeable terms, and quite often microbiome and microbiota are used interchangeably because the genes represent the actual organisms. And metabolites are the chemical byproducts of their activity. And metabolites are actually more important than anything. It's the metabolites that are critical to our health. It's what they produce. It doesn't matter what bacteria are there. It matters, the reason they matter is because of the specific chemicals and hormones and enzymes that they produce that affect our biology in infinite number of ways. So what do all of these, and bacteria do for us? And the word symbiont is just an adjective. It's another word for our microbiota, and it indicates that they're good guys. The bad guys are called pathogens. But anyway, so what do our symbionts, our good gut bacteria, do for us? So far, we've uncovered the following. Firstly, in the large intestine, also referred to as the colon, bacteria convert the fibre in the fruit, vegetables, plant foods that we eat, that we can't digest, into chemicals called short-chain fatty acids, SCFAs. And the best known and the best loved and probably the most useful of these is a chemical called butyrate. And they're already starting to make supplements with just the butyrate in them, because butyrate we believe, well, we found that it reduces inflammation and it may even protect the colon from developing cancer. So in general, it keeps us healthy there. Other things that they do is, so that is why we need to eat 30 grams of fibre a day, because we need to feed our good gut bacteria and give them the raw materials to produce the substances that keep us healthy. Our intestinal bacteria also synthesize vitamins, B1, B7, folate, B12, vitamin K, because we don't have all the enzymes to make these vitamins active. We need our gut bacteria to activate them for us. They also facilitate absorption of minerals like magnesium, calcium, iron. So poor gut health can lead to vitamin and mineral deficiencies. Gut bacteria also produce a wide range of other chemicals, including more than 20 hormones. And these can influence our hunger, our food cravings, our mood, energy levels, general health. Gut bacteria produce neurotransmitters. You've probably heard one of which is serotonin. You know, serotonin, the happy hormone. We used to think most of it was produced in our brain. In fact, 90% of it is produced in our gut. No wonder food influences mood. Gut bacteria can neutralize the many of the toxins we ingest. If you don't have many of these detoxifying organisms that protect you against pathogens, you may end up with more infections, harder work for your liver. Our gut bacteria regulate our immune system, and they help to train our immune system. And really importantly, they help to regulate our body weight. As I said before, that your body weight is influenced more by your gut bacteria than by your genes. And so far we've identified 3 players in this: Firmicutes, Bacteroidetes, and Akkermansia. Quite easy to remember. Firmicutes are a bacteria that extract more calories from our food, and they're called good or better calorie harvesters, and they're fantastic to have in a famine, but they're not fantastic to have when we've got a surplus of food, because Firmicutes make us fat. Bacteroidetes, on the other hand, aren't as good at extracting calories from our food, so people with more Bacteroidetes tend to be slimmer. Half their luck. And then we've got another bacteria called Akkermansia, which feeds on the mucus in our stomach. Slim people, about 4% of the bacteria in their gut belong to the Akkermansia species, whereas overweight people, obese people, have very few of these gut bacteria. And stay tuned, because I'm going to tell you how you can increase your Akkermansia. And no, they don't have probiotics that specifically have Akkermansia in them, otherwise they'd be flying off the shelves. And one last really fascinating thing that they do is that microbes mess with our genes. We have something called a guardian gene, and this gene protects us from developing autoimmune diseases. Mice also have this gene, and when they are given antibiotics within the first 6 weeks of their life, they lose the protective effect of this gene and go on to develop type 1 diabetes. Even when the babies weren't given antibiotics themselves, but their mothers received antibiotics in the 10 days before giving birth, the babies still developed diabetes. However, if the antibiotics were delayed until after 6 weeks of age, the gene was able to do its job and stop the mice getting diabetes. Does this translate to humans? Well, it's not going to be ethical to do an experiment. However, when you look back at the statistics, human babies who receive antibiotics within the first 2 years of life, because that's when our foundational bacteria are established, between the first 2 to 3 years of life, or people whose mothers received antibiotics late in pregnancy, have a high risk of developing autoimmune diseases, allergies, asthma, diabetes, and obesity. Now, you can't change this if it happened to you, nor should you feel guilty if you had antibiotics in pregnancy and therefore possibly put your child at risk. Antibiotics save lives. The message here is we shouldn't use antibiotics willy-nilly just in case. Make sure there's always a good reason for using antibiotics, because they continue to affect our gut flora throughout life. It's just that the effects are greatest when we're youngest. The reason I'm telling you this is so that you don't beat yourself up and go, but I'm doing everything right and I still seem to have gut problems. Maybe you had a tougher start in life. Maybe you had lots of antibiotics, or your mother had lots of antibiotics, and there are other things. So you are not what you eat. You are what your gut bacteria do with what you eat? Which leads us to the all-important question, how do we cultivate a healthy microbiome in our gut? Well, the first question is, what does a healthy microbiome look like in the first place? And this is highly debatable, but one thing everybody agrees on, the biggest key to a healthy gut is diversity, having as many different species as possible. The people who have more species in their gut tend to have much healthier guts, not just much healthier guts, tend to have fewer allergies, fewer autoimmune diseases, less risk of diabetes, less risk of cancer, less risk of obesity. The list goes on. The more different bacteria you have, the better. And then obviously it also depends on the species, but we don't yet know what the ideal species is. And that's why I've had a question, and I'll talk more about probiotics later, but to answer one of the questions I received, should we be taking probiotics? Are probiotics helpful? Let me give you an analogy as an answer. Are multivitamins helpful? Well, if you are iron deficient, that's a mineral, not a vitamin, but if you are iron deficient, yes, you need to take iron. Taking a multivitamin with iron in it may or may not be helpful, because whether or not you absorb iron depends on a whole lot of other factors. If you take supplemental iron, you also need to take it with vitamin C. You shouldn't be taking it with calcium and magnesium because they all kind of fight for absorption. So you shouldn't be taking lots of different minerals together because you're not going to absorb as much of them. And it seems that gut bacteria are the same. You may not be able to take more of them. You know, it may be a case of a specific one that you need. It may be several that you need. It may be that they will mix with your own gut bacteria well, but they won't mix well with somebody else. So at this stage, the science is way too young to be prescriptive about what you need. We don't know enough. In theory, I've just been saying, the more diverse gut bacteria you have, the healthier you tend to be. But it's more than just willy-nilly taking probiotics, because those probiotics may not be the ones that you need. You may be already giving yourself things that you already have. Now, if you happen to have by chance found a probiotic, tried it on yourself, and you feel fantastic, great. It's a bit like a lottery. You might have won the lottery ticket in the probiotics game, but I can't guarantee it. And I certainly will not prescribe it because I don't know. I don't know what you need. Neither does anybody else. And certainly neither does the label on the bottle. Okay, there's my little rant. So, spoiler alert, a healthy microbiome goes way beyond taking pre and probiotics. Let's see what happens, as an example, when things go wrong. Let's wind back to the year 2010. This is another fascinating story. 61-year-old Mabel. That's not her real name, but I have to respect doctor-patient confidentiality, so we'll call her Mabel. She had been treated with antibiotics for pneumonia. The good news is the antibiotics cured her chest infection, but the bad news is the antibiotics wiped out many of the good bacteria in her gut, and as a result, a very nasty bacterium called Clostridium difficile, often abbreviated C. diff, moved in and took over. You do not want to have Clostridium difficile. It is extremely nasty. For 8 months, Mabel suffered from intractable diarrhea every 15 minutes. This is a true case study. I'm not making any of this up. This is a true case study. Every 15 minutes she had diarrhea. She lost 27 kilograms. She ended up being confined to a wheelchair because she was so weak. Nothing her doctors did help. No antibiotics were touching this C. diff, and they thought she was going to die. Until her gastroenterologist, his name was Dr. Karutz from the University of Minnesota, decided on one last resort. He gave her a bowel flush, sort of cleaned out her bowel. Then, using a colonoscope, he collected 25 grams, only a very small amount of feces, from her healthy husband of 44 years. He mixed it with 300 mils of water, and then he squirted it from a colonoscope into her colon. The next day, amazingly, Mabel's diarrhea stopped. The day after that, she had her first solid bowel motion in 8 months, and day by day, she continued to improve. 1 month later, she was fully recovered. Welcome to the brand new medicine of food transplants, known more technically as FMT, fecal microbial transplantation, also known as bacteriotherapy, or human probiotic infusion, or transfusion. No, I just made that one up. Or prebiotics. No, I just made that one up as well. Or capsules. That I didn't make up, but they're not really popular because people don't like to ingest something that they know has come out of somebody else's bottom. But cattle farmers, this is not a new technology. Cattle farmers have been using what they call fecal transfer for centuries, because when cows change their diet, they can get indigestion. And farmers treat this by sucking the fluid out of the stomach of a healthy cow and feeding it to the sick cow. This is working at the top of the gut, but the principle is the same. You are putting healthy bugs into somebody who is having gut troubles. And in fact, back in the 1950s, people were dying from a gut disease called pseudomembranous colitis, which is where the colon is really inflamed and it's got these fake membranes on its inner walls, and 75% of people with severe case die. And doctors guessed that maybe there was something, something wrong with the gut flora, and so they would reset the bacteria of the sick person by infusing their colon with feces from a healthy person. And most of the patients made a miraculous discovery. But they stopped this process because they thought it was a bit unrefined when antibiotics took off. 70 years later, we are bringing back fecal transplants. And what have the studies found? In mice, if you transplant the poo from a slim mouse into an obese mouse, the obese mouse will lose weight, and it works in the opposite as well. In humans, poo transplants are being tested as potential treatments for a whole range of gastrointestinal disorders. So far, they've had good success with irritable bowel syndrome, inflammatory bowel conditions like Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. But they're also being tested in type 2 diabetes, arthritis, neurodegenerative diseases, and a whole lot more. Now, I actually took this photo when I was in Sydney some time ago. If you live in Sydney, you might want to visit the Centre for Digestive Diseases in Fibre, which is the only place I'm aware of so far that actually does FMT, fecal microbial transplantation, as treatments in Australia. And there's a very high demand for donors because it's more difficult to become a poo donor than it is a blood donor. The criteria are much more stringent. For instance, you can't have taken antibiotics, antacids, or a range of other medications for the last 2 years. You can't have bowel issues yourself. You can't have any autoimmune diseases. The list goes on and on. Like, quite frankly, I'm too scared to offer my poo for a donation because I don't want someone to tell me my shit's not good enough. But if you do make the cut, you get paid very well because it's demanding work. You have to deliver a fresh specimen to the clinic every morning, and it's used that day. When it becomes mainstream, I wonder what the slogan's going to be, because, we've got give blood, give a shit. Who knows? Interesting to ponder, but we're not there yet. So until we do get there, we need to do everything we possibly can to cultivate a healthy microbiome. So let's start at the very beginning. And as I said, when I go through these things, some of them you're not going to be able to change, but at least it's going to give you an idea of your starting point and why you might have to work harder than someone else. And even though you'll hear that our gut bacteria are established in the first 3 years of life, we can change them. It just takes a concerted effort, but not as hard as you think. Okay, so the things that we're going to cover that make, how do we cultivate a healthy microbiome? The foundation, the first 3 years of life, the impact of stress, lifestyle, biotics, all those prebiotics, probiotics, postbiotics, psychobiotics, symbiotics, whatever. And the microbial disruptors, the things that we should avoid. Oops, sorry, too far ahead of myself. Okay, so when is the microbiome established? The first thing to note is that if a person is born by cesarean section, they don't pass through the birth canal, and that means they don't pick up all the bacteria in the mother's vagina or the adjacent anus. I'm sorry, birth is a messy process, but that's a good thing because you're picking up all these bacteria. If you're born by cesarean, you miss out on that. So in those very early stages of life, you don't have the same gut bacteria as a baby born by normal vaginal delivery. And that actually puts babies at a higher risk of allergies, autoimmune diseases, type 1 and 2 diabetes, asthma, the list goes on. Similarly, now, the good news, however, is, and they're doing this in Europe, and I would suggest that we start this in Australia, and if you request it, the gynecologist obstetrician will do this. What they're now doing in Europe is, if you have to be born by Caesar, and again, cesareans save lives, but cesareans should not be done just for convenience. There should really be a very serious medical reason for doing them, not just because you prefer it, because your baby's missing out on those bacteria. However, what the obstetricians are now doing is they're taking a swab. If you have to be born by cesarean, they're taking a swab of the mother's vagina and the mother's anus. And as soon as the baby's delivered by cesarean, they're wiping this all over the baby in all its mouth and nose, so that and they're finding that they're really good results, that they have pretty much very similar gut bacteria than if they were born by vaginal delivery, because they're being introduced to it that way. So there are ways around things. Then what we've discovered is, if a mother is stressed in pregnancy, particularly late in pregnancy, stress changes the composition of our gut bacteria and unfortunately has a negative effect on the baby's gut bacteria and even on brain development. As soon as the baby is born, it is really helpful to have skin-to-skin contact, because remember, our skin also has bacteria. We want that baby touching mother as soon as possible to pick up her skin bacteria. Breastfeeding has 600 different species of bacteria. It also has specific carbohydrates in it called HMO, 100 different human milk oligosaccharides, which feed the good gut bacteria. So, and breastfeeding also helps develop the immune system. Breastfeeding is really important also for having a good gut bacteria. Again, not all women can breastfeed. Do the best you can. And unfortunately, no formulas have these HMOs in them. We can't yet produce them all. Then we move on to stress in early childhood. If you were bullied, if you had any kind of physical, psychological, emotional trauma, child abuse, unfortunately, this changes the chemical environment of the gut, of your gut, and will actually make you more prone to mental health issues later. It's not just the psychological scars, it's actually the microbial scars. So it goes a long way to affecting every area of our life. Stress seriously influences our gut function, and in fact, chronic stress throughout life is as damaging as an unhealthy diet. Just remember that. Meditation could be more important than taking probiotics. People will debate that, but I say, you know, which way would I go? I would definitely go meditation before I would go probiotics. Then there was a fascinating study about the effects of conflict. Scientists from Georgia State University, they wanted to see whether people who had stronger personality, who were winners in conflict, had stronger, healthier gut bacteria than people who were weaker. They did this, they tested this with hamsters, because hamsters establish natural hierarchies where there are winners and losers. So they took specimens of their gut bacteria when they were born, and they kept tracking them throughout the establishment of hierarchies. And what they found astonished them. Yes, at the end of the day, when they had fought it out, the hamsters higher up in the hamster hierarchy did have different gut bacteria to those lower down, but all of them suffered during the conflict. All of them lost diversity. So there are no winners in conflict. Then they found something even more surprising. When they went back and examined their feces, the gut bacteria in their feces predicted who would be a winner and who would be a loser, who would be higher up in the hierarchy, who would be lower. Amazing stuff. So maybe he has his gut bacteria to thank for all of this. So the point really I'm making is just to remember the effect of chronic stress. Now let's move on to some lifestyle effects. first poll question coming up. So these are now, a lot of that stuff you couldn't change. I mean, your current stress, you certainly can. So that would be my number one thing. Manage stress. That will automatically improve your gut health. What are other lifestyle things we can do? First poll question for you. Oh, meant to put this earlier. So, does quantity and quality of our sleep have any effect on our microbiome? What do you think? Yes? No? I don't know. Okay, so the next thing to look at is what we've actually found is that the quality and quantity of our sleep affect our gut microbiome. If you have poor quality sleep, guess what? You have less diversity in your gut bacteria. You are also producing less bacteria that make those short-chain fatty acids butyrate. So sleep is really important. There's a whole, I mean, I could have spent this whole webinar just talking about the effect of sleep on your gut microbiome. The message is manage your sleep. I think that is also more important than your probiotics. Next poll question. Do we think exercise makes a difference to our microbiome? So second poll question. Researchers, thank you very much, everybody. Oh, good. Went away this time. Our microbes want us to move because 2 new studies led by researchers from the University of Illinois have shown that the composition of gut bacteria can be changed by exercise alone. The first study was in mice, the second study was in humans. So mice were allowed to run on treadmills and people were asked to do 3 hours of aerobic exercise a day. That's not as bad as it sounds. It was a daily 40-minute walk. Not too bad. The result in both mice and men and women was that there was an increase in gut microbial diversity once again, and an increase in those butyrate producing bacteria. So remember, they were the 2 keys that I said signified a healthy gut. Go for that 30 to 40-minute walk a day. And again, better than taking probiotics. Okay, the next thing. Could you be suffering from NDD? Who knows what that stands for? It would be funny if it wasn't true. Nature deficit disorder. People who don't spend enough time in nature, like there are people who hardly spend any time, and you only need, even just 10 minutes a day, have a much higher risk of depression, anxiety, and stress-related disorders. And once again, when we're in nature, we are in contact with so many diverse, healthy bacteria. The nasties won't come to us unless we've got a problem. But if we're, in good health, we will attract good gut bacteria whenever we spend time in nature. And in particular, spending time in nature lowers blood pressure. In England, they've started ecotherapy. What that means is paying someone an awful lot of money to take your hand and walk you through a park. Let me save you a lot of money. Walk through a park, walk through your own garden yourself. And in fact, gardening is fantastic for gut health because we've discovered that there is a bacteria in soil called Mycobacterium vaccae. And whenever we garden, we inhale this bacteria. And guess what? This bacteria stimulates our brain cells to produce brain and gut cells to produce serotonin. Guess what serotonin is? It's the happy hormone. And it also stimulates BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is in fact how antidepressants work. So literally, gardening has the same effect as taking Prozac. Who would have ever thought? Or anyone who's ever gardened. And just a word of advice, if you are ever in hospital, make sure you ask for a room with a view of nature, because even just looking out in nature, patients need fewer painkillers, recover quicker, get out of hospital sooner. Similarly, if you ever find yourself in prison, ask for a cell with a view of nature, because prisoners who look out onto nature behave better, get sick less often, get out of prison sooner. This is invaluable advice, people. Aren't you glad you're here tonight? And finally, remember I mentioned Akkermansia, that this was the more Akkermansia we have, the slimmer we tend to be. The best thing to promote Akkermansia is to stop snacking. I'll tell you why. Akkermansia feeds on the mucus in our gut, and we never get enough mucus developing if we're constantly eating. Our mucus requires us to go for prolonged periods without eating. And this is why I've so often said in these webinars, 12 hours of fasting between dinner and breakfast. If you can stretch it out to 16 hours, fantastic. This will feed your Akkermansia. And in particular, just don't snack throughout the day, because this is just it just impedes weight loss for a lot of reasons. And yes, I know, for so many years, health practitioners, personal trainers, dietitians have said, lots of small meals throughout the day. That is one of the worst pieces of advice, health advice we've ever given people for gut health, for diabetes, and for weight loss. Stop snacking, just eat 2 or 3 meals a day, and don't eat beyond a 10 to 12 hour window. Okay. Right, now probably what you've all been waiting for. And I know you know some of this, so I'm just going to whiz through it. But, okay, most people know what prebiotics are. They are the non-digestible fibres in plant foods that are food for your gut bacteria, that encourage the growth of healthy bacteria. So this simply translates into eating as large a variety of vegetables and fruits as you can, and eating the skins, but of course, wash them well to remove pesticides. Now, particularly good prebiotics are garlic, onion, leek, asparagus, endive, chicory, and artichoke. But any plant food has prebiotic value to one degree or another. You can also turn potatoes, rice, and pasta into prebiotics, better prebiotics, by cooling and reheating them. I think I've mentioned this before, but in a different context. Or if you just cool down your starches, your potatoes, your rice, your pasta, what it does is it allows the starch to crystallize and it makes them resistant to digestion, hence the term resistant starch, and then they start to act as a prebiotic. So if you love your carbs, cool them down. Moving along to probiotics. Probiotics are simply live microorganisms believed to provide health benefits when we eat them. And the most common probiotic food is yogurt, but make sure it is completely natural, contains live cultures, and doesn't have any added sugar or flavorings or colorings or preservatives or additives, otherwise you'll negate the benefits. So your plain yogurt is fantastic, but even plain yogurt can have some additives and emulsifiers. You don't need them because emulsifiers, which you may remember from the past, actually stimulate the production of an unhealthy protein, which causes inflammation. So avoid the emulsifiers. Probiotics also include your fermented foods like sauerkraut, kimchi, kefir, kombucha, miso, and tempeh. And every culture in the world has a range of these fermented foods, from sourdough to pickled gherkins to fermented cheeses. Just a word of warning, if you're buying these like sauerkraut from the supermarket, sometimes they use vinegar rather than fermentation. And even if they do use bacteria, sometimes they will heat treat the product just to prevent any nasty bacterial overgrowth, which negates the whole thing. So you're better off making them yourself or buying them from somebody at your local markets that has made them herself. There's resistant starch I've talked about. That was a reminder in case I forget. Now, another point about probiotics. I had a question. Where was it? Somebody on this webinar said, I buy culture starter that is added to coconut water to make water kefir, but when the person drinks it, they get reflux. And the company said this could happen when you take kefir as the bad bugs die off. That makes me really annoyed because it's just simplifying something that just doesn't happen that way. Kefir or any fermented foods don't make the bad bugs die off. Maybe it will promote the growth of the healthy ones, which might crowd out the bad ones, but that just too simplistic. So this person says whenever she has this kefir, it upsets her stomach. So the question is, poll question, should she resist or should she persist or not? So she's getting reflux, she's getting flushing. What do we advise this person to do? Should she persist because fermented foods are healthy? My personal opinion, there's no right or wrong answer because the short answer is we really don't know. But my personal opinion is not to persist because follow your body, allow your body to guide you. If you're getting reflux, that's not good. If you're getting unpleasant symptoms, maybe that particular culture doesn't agree with the bugs that are in you. I mean, maybe if there's a little bit of discomfort, look, if you increase your fibre, you are going to get a little bit of a stomach bloating or upset. because you're not used to it. But the reflux, I don't like the sound of. The flushing, I don't like the sound of. To me, that sounds like you're sensitive to that product. Don't take it. There are plenty of other ways to get fermented foods. Try something that agrees with you. That would be my advice to you. Okay. Now, that brings me to another point. Remember, the other question was to persist or not to persist. With probiotics that you take in, what we found is that in some people, they'll take a probiotic. The probiotic actually does mix very well with their gut flora. They say that they feel much better. Great. Continue to take them. And we call these people persisters. Other people, on the other hand, will take the same probiotic, but when they measure that, and they do this measuring fecal samples, all of the probiotic just goes straight out into their poo. They're completely wasting their money. And these people are called resistors. So at this stage of the game, we don't, unless you get your poo tested by a lab and you compare it to the probiotic you're taking, we don't know whether you're a persister or a resistor. You may be wasting your money. You may be doing yourself good. The best way to know is if you feel better. But at this stage of the game, I would probably put way more. I know I'm being repetitive, but I want to make the point. I would put more time into managing stress, getting good sleep, getting regular exercise, and eating real foods, high fiber foods, 30 to 50 grams of fiber a day. So just, lots of plant foods. You're doing yourself more good than taking commercially made pre and probiotics. So a couple of other definitions. What's a psychobiotic? It's simply the name given to a probiotic that is designed to improve your mental health or reduce depression. And yes, in some studies, certain specific strains of probiotic have been found to improve mental health. Whether they'll work for you or not, I don't know, because it is very strain specific. Depends which bacteria you are lacking and you might need. So that's just so you're aware. A psychobiotic is a probiotic used for mental health improvement. A symbiotic is simply a probiotic plus a prebiotic combination. And there are, you can buy them. And a pharmabiotic is a broader category than a probiotic. A pharmabiotic can be a probiotic. Remember, probiotics are live organisms, but a pharmabiotic can also be a dead microorganism, or can be a part of a microorganism, or can be a product produced by a microorganism after it interacts with our gut. So a pharmabiotic is kind of anything that is related to a microorganism in our gut that has pharmacological effects. So there has to be some kind of strong science behind them that they seem to improve our health. I'm telling you this just because you're going to come across them and want to know what the hell they are. A postbiotic is the same as a metabolite. It's the byproducts of their activity. So a postbiotic is something that a bacteria will make. It might be an enzyme, or it might be a hormone, or it might be chemical, or it might be an acid or something produced by a bacteria. And postbiotics are being detected in people's stools. And it's called the fecal metabolome. Just for interest, we can also pick up some of the things that our gut bugs make in our feces. So that's another area of interest. And they're now creating smart toilets or toilet paper that collects these products of our poo that can be analysed and tell you what your bacteria are actually producing. So in summary, prebiotics feed probiotics. And when probiotics feed on prebiotics, they make postbiotics. And if they affect your brain, if they mess with your mind, they're psychobiotics. Okay, to close, what are things we should avoid? And some of these are really obvious, and some of these we've covered in previous webinars. So obviously, antibiotics are going to disrupt your microbiome. And I had a question. Should you take probiotics when you take antibiotics? A very, very definitive no. And I think we might, if we talked about this before, I apologize, but I want to emphasize the point. The reason being, the studies have found when you take antibiotics and you're wiping out your good gut back, some of the bacteria you don't want to wipe out, as well as the nasties that are causing the infection. If you take probiotics immediately afterwards, it will make it harder for your own bacteria, good bacteria, to reestablish, because now they're fighting. Think about it, they're fighting for space. If the it's like if you've had to evacuate your town because of the antibiotics, if you come back and a new population of people have invaded your house, then there's no room for you. So if you've been taking probiotics for years and then you have antibiotics, then I suspect the probiotics aren't going to make so much difference because you're already used to them. But if you haven't taken probiotics before, don't start taking them after your antibiotics. It'll take longer for your own good gut bacteria to reestablish. Okay, we've talked about antacids. They can increase depression due to their effect on our gut microbiome. We've also found aspirin, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs, lots of painkillers, HRT, corticosteroids, and chemo and radiotherapy all affect our gut microbiome. I'm not telling you not to take chemo and radiotherapy. What I'm telling you is these things can have an effect on our gut. It's things to be aware of. And it's also just to be aware that the more medications we test, and now people have, throughout the world have tested hundreds of medications. The more medications we test, the more we find that just about every drug also affects our gut microbiome. It makes sense that it would, doesn't it? It passes through them, and most of them might have a bite of it and see what it does. So it's just to make the point, drugs are not lollies. Be very, very selective about when you need medications and if they're absolutely necessary. The other thing we found is people who had a tonsillectomy before the age of 7 or 9, the jury's still out, our tonsils, the bacteria in our tonsils, and the immune cells in our tonsils train the local bacteria on what is self and what is non-self, and what they should and shouldn't attack. So children who have their tonsils out at an early age are more likely to have autoimmune diseases, allergies, and intolerances because their body hasn't had long enough to be trained to recognize what is harmful and what is helpful inside their own body. Again, you can't change this, but maybe that's why you're a bit more sensitive to things, maybe. And it's never a definitive straight line. It just increases the risk of asthma and autoimmune diseases. Try and avoid an appendicectomy if you can, because our appendix contains the most high-level pathogen-fighting bacteria in our gut. And if we remove our appendix, it just means we have less armed forces to fight off infections in our gut at a later date. Of course, if you have an inflamed appendix and you don't get it out, it could burst and you could die. So by all means, get it out if you have to. But, decades ago, doctors would in there for one thing, and we might as well remove the appendix anyway. It's not doing anything. We now know it certainly is doing something. Okay, and the final one, processed food is like rat poison for our gut bugs. Surprise, surprise. Study after study has found that adolescents who eat more processed food have a higher incidence of depression, anxiety, ADHD, and mental health issues. Wow, who would have guessed that processed food might have done that? And we're not just talking junk food, we're just talking packaged food of any type because of all those additives, preservatives, artificial colorings and flavorings. Remember, I've talked about emulsifiers. We've definitely found that they now do affect. We haven't tested every emulsifier on the market, but we've tested enough to know that as a general rule, I would avoid emulsifiers. And of course, we've spent a lot of time on artificial sweeteners. They too affect our gut bacteria in a negative way. So in summary, shall we run through the top 22 steps to good gut health? Okay, drum roll, let's go. And then I will finish by answering the questions that I have not yet answered. So firstly, ask your mother to avoid stress and antibiotics during pregnancy. Have a normal vaginal delivery. Have skin-to-skin contact with your mother as soon as you're born. Breastfeed as long as you can. Avoid antibiotics, especially in the first 3 years of your life. Avoid being abused or bullied. Avoid severe stress trauma and conflict, especially in the first 20 years of your life. Learn to manage stress effectively. Don't get your tonsils out before the age of 9. Don't get your appendix out ever. Get regular good quality sleep. Get regular exercise, 30 to 40 minutes of a brisk walk every day. Eat real, whole, unadulterated food, especially plant foods, vegetables, fruits, nuts, legumes. Aim for a minimum of 30 grams of fibre a day. Obviously, build up to this if you're not used to it. Otherwise, your gut will explode. Seriously. 30 to 50 grams would be ideal. Probably, our ancestors were eating 100 to 150 grams. Don't go for that high. Our guts just couldn't handle it anymore. Keep refined sugar to less than 6 teaspoons a day. Eat fibre-rich foods as your prebiotics. Eat fermented foods for your probiotics. Don't take probiotics with antibiotics. Avoid your microbial disruptors like antacids, aspirin, a lot of the painkillers, corticosteroids. Avoid food additives, emulsifiers, preservatives, colorings, artificial sweeteners. Fast for 12 hours overnight and avoid snacking, and spend time in nature. So if you had a gut-wrenching start in life, literally, all is not lost. You can coax your gut to better health. Focus on the things you can change. Manage your stress, sleep, exercise, avoid disruptors as much as you can, and eat those whole, real, unadulterated foods, and spend time in nature. Because as Buddha taught, each morning we are born again. What we do today is what matters most. Okay, any questions? And before we get into poll number, the last poll, I am going to go through, I've got written up your questions here, so I'm just going to go through them at all.
I've got one here for you, Helena. What does 30 grams of fibre look like?
Okay, the best answer is go to my website, winningatslimming.com/resources. Is it winningatslimming.com/resources? There is a list of foods and how much fibre they all contain. That's probably the easiest answer to that question, because then it's just mixing and matching as many different plant foods as you can.
Skin-to-skin touch for babies. What about people other than mother touching the child?
Fine. Yep, good. The more siblings you have, the more pets you have, the less your mother sprayed antibacterial stuff around the house, the fewer allergies and asthma you tend to have. So yeah, other people's skin is fine too. Good. The more people you're exposed to, the more, friendly bacteria you're exposed to.
No more questions. Oh, hang on. Does that include removal of androids? I don't think it's called androids, isn't it? It's adenoids, I think it means. Does that include removal of adenoids in kids under 9 years?
Yes, it does. The studies were done on tonsils and adenoids. Slightly different risks, but both associated with health risks.
And what about sanitizers? Not sure what that means.
Okay, sanitizers. Look, before COVID, I would have said, just go easy on the antibacterials. I wouldn't use antibacterials unless you are in an infective area. Like in hospital, absolutely, because it's full of pathogens. But in most people's homes, I wouldn't have been using antibacterials. However, because of COVID, my answer is now different, and it is, we need antibacterials at the moment. Sorry, antivirals, alcohol, sanitizers. We need them now because of COVID. But in the past, I wouldn't have been so diligent. So it depends on the circumstance. And of course, if you go to a third world country and you're not used to their pathogens, yes, you need to use antivirals and sanitizers and antibacterials regardless of COVID. Yeah. So it depends on the situation.
Okay, wonderful. I've got no more here on the chat. So what have you got?
Okay, so I had a question. I've covered does taking a probiotic help? I told you it depends. I had a question about a product called Gastro Daily. So I went online, and Gastro Daily is actually a symbiotic. It has a probiotic and a prebiotic, and it's got a whole list of things that it might do. Now, it cannot claim to cure things because it doesn't, but it says, has been found to support, may support, blah, 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 blah. And it may support. However, okay, what you need to do is always read the ingredients, and not just the active ingredients, but also the excipients. But let me first cover the active ingredients. One of the active ingredients is, apart from the actual bacteria, is peppermint dry leaf. Now, some people, not everyone, actually find peppermint irritating and it causes reflux. So I would just be careful of something with peppermint because it doesn't agree with everybody, even though it can be very helpful in some conditions, and it has been used with, you know, in a lot of different cultures, you know, to help conditions, but just doesn't agree with everybody. And another thing with peppermint products, they may have a negative effect if they're used with iron supplements, antihypertensives, and certain antibiotics. So just be careful. So that's as far as the active ingredients. Then look at the fine print where it says excipients. Now, excipients are additives that are necessary to stabilize the product. Either, you know, they're preservatives or they might be bulking agents, and all drugs have excipients. And this is why generic drugs aren't always the same as the branded product, because once they're released and other companies are allowed to copy them, they only, the mother company only tells them the active ingredients. And so the person making the mimic drug just chooses their own excipients. And sometimes some excipients agree with one person and not another. So in this particular product, the excipients are silica, cocoa powder, stevia, chocolate flavor, peppermint flavor. I don't like the idea of chocolate flavor, peppermint flavor. I don't know what it is. Nothing wrong with the cocoa powder. And silica is also another ingredient that, look, don't breathe. If you breathe in silica, it can cause lung problems, which you're not going to do. And silica is found in a lot of products. But all I'm saying is, I would not personally spend my money on this product because I do the other natural things way in preference to this. Exception is if you've already tried it and you actually feel fantastic on it, keep going. But I wouldn't go out of my way because there's thousands of products like this, and who knows which one's right for you. Okay, then I also had a whole lot of questions about what do I think of smoothies? Okay, in short, smoothies are generally sugar bombs. They are mashed up fruit, and even if the fruit itself is healthy, the blender blades pulverize the fibre, so you're not getting the prebiotic benefits of that fruit. Personally, I think smoothies are one of the best marketed products out there because they have this health halo, yet they're loaded with sugar. You would drink way more fruit and vegetables than you would ever eat. So you're absorbing way more calories and you're missing out on the benefits of fiber. Yes, you're getting the vitamins and the minerals. I personally don't think they're a great idea. Eat your fruit instead. However, if you absolutely love them, use more vegetables than fruit. Don't, use the skin, keep them as chunky as possible. And all this nonsense that manufacturers will say you can't mix acid fruits with sweet fruits, which are which, just ignore the nonsense. Is frozen peeled banana good with everything? There's nothing wrong with a frozen peeled banana, but I'd rather you ate it. Even if you like I used to give my dad, because he'd love ice cream, I used to freeze bananas and give dad a banana chopped up as ice cream. It tastes like ice cream. So I would prefer you ate it. They say that dairy does not mix with kiwi fruit. So does that cancel out Greek yogurt? Nonsense. Even if you're avoiding dairy, is Greek yogurt a good addition to any smoothie? Nothing wrong with Greek yogurt, but make sure it doesn't have any additives. So if you're having it, nothing wrong with adding the Greek yogurt. Which liquid is best? Almond milk, coconut water, or oat milk? Go back to our milk webinar. Read the labels, because some almond milk is just the almonds. Great. But a lot of almond milk has added sugar, emulsifiers, and vegetable oils. Don't touch it. So it's about reading the labels. Is dairy good or bad one way or the other? It depends on you. There's nothing wrong with dairy if you can digest it. In other words, if you maintain the enzyme lactase. So yeah, just a few guidelines on smoothies. I would prefer you ate your fruit rather than pulverized it, because you're not getting all the benefits of the fruit.
I think, Helena, just to add to that, and you and I've conversed about this before when we've had lunch sometimes about a smoothie, because I don't mind a smoothie. One of the things that I've been doing with the smoothies and making sure it's one piece of fruit, typically. Yep. So I only have a banana smoothie, and I'm also ensuring that it's only a cup of, I have almond milk because I like almond milk, and I have Nutty Breast that doesn't have any of the emulsifiers in it. Great. So I just have one. In fact, it's only 3/4 of a cup of milk, because by the time you do all the pulverization, there's enough. I think the other problem with smoothies is the quantity they make them in. They're massive, and that's a massive issue I've learned from you.
Yep, I agree. And I was also asked a question about glycemic load. I will answer that next week because it fits in with our topic next week. So if you can hang off from the glycemic load. All right, that's it from me tonight. So poll question number 4, and I'm happy to answer any more questions.
One last question here. Does gut health change as we age? From Bernie.
Okay, that's a really good question. The answer is yes, but we don't know whether that's because they would change naturally or whether that's because we've had more years of stress, more years of poor sleep, more years of artificial flavorings, colorings, preservatives, more years of taking antibiotics. In the aging field, there's now a lot of debate about what is just part of the aging process and would happen anyway, or what is the result of an accumulation of good or unhealthy lifestyle habits. So the short answer to your question is they have found that people who eat a lot of prebiotic, a lot of the onion, garlic, leek, artichoke, they tend to have health. Definitely that is one of the keys to having a healthier gut as we age. So yeah, it does tend to change, but we're not sure whether that's lifestyle or whether that's aging itself. I always in these webinars try and teach you how to fish rather than give you fish. So give you templates so that you can answer your own questions going forward. So if there are no more questions, thank you very much for your company tonight. And just a heads up, I've already had questions about cholesterol, high blood pressure, ketones, glycemic index, and diabetes. So in the next couple of weeks, I'm not sure what order I will answer the questions, but just have a heads up that there's some of the topics that we will be covering.
Wonderful. All right. Thanks again, Helena. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next month.
Thank you very much.